Hey there, and welcome back to the Culturally Sound podcast. I am so excited to have Beth Boyd with me today, who is a fractional leader in learning, leadership, development, onboarding, and employee engagement. And it's something that I've been dying to tackle as a topic. So I am so glad you're here, Beth. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I'm super excited for this conversation.
So, talk to me about where this all started. For me, I started in construction, super, I don't know, very authoritative space, right? Bunch of men building stuff, cutting stuff apart, ripping stuff down, and putting it up. And, it was very much do as I say, don't do as I do, don't ask any questions, just get the work done. I wanted to change that. Where did you start?
So I spent my first chapter in retail where very
Oh, wow.
similar, you have planograms, you execute on those, you help your customers, you worry about your conversion, you worry about other things, you don't worry about growth and development. And so when I finally left in 2015, I started a blog. It was more cathartic than anything. And it was really about leadership and culture in retail, helping people who were leaders learn a little something every day. And that just somehow exploded in the best way. And I ended up doing what I was meant to do and what I love to do, which is that development, engagement, onboarding as a full time gig. And yeah, so that's where it started for me. And I love the adventure and I love the journey.
Awesome. And do you have like an aha moment or a tipping point where you're like, oh my God, I got to create some change?
I have lots of those. I have those this week too. Yeah, I think my most recent bigger one, and sort of the one that I've been thinking about as I knew this conversation was coming up, was I started with a company and I went through their onboarding process. This was in 2023. And
Mhm.
it was very bland. It didn't make me feel like I'd made a great decision to join. It felt like every other company. And I just knew there was a better way of doing things. And you referenced it earlier pre-recording, right? That we were in this hustle culture. Stay in your lane, head down, get your stuff done. There's rifts going on. Protect yourself. And I think that was where a lot of companies were in 2023. And, I think that there is an opportunity to not only say, do a really good job every day, but also make you feel like you're part of a community and like you are learning and developing and growing and all of that good stuff that a lot of companies are leaving behind right now in favor of like, just be grateful you have a job, right?
Yeah. 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 And that's such, we're like, it's so hard, right? Because, there's so many comments, so many studies coming out saying, you know, today's generation, before it was the millennials and they're so entitled and this, that, the other. And now it's Gen Zs. They think they know it all. And they'd much rather work for nothing if they feel like they're doing something purposeful. It's like, yes, yes. And so does everybody else. And if they're not
Yes.
telling you that they do, they're lying to your face to keep their job.
Yep.
So let's just pull back the veil and call it what it is and say, people work harder, they show up as more of their full selves, and they participate at a much higher level with way more creativity when you give them the space to do so and treat them like adults. It's
Absolutely.
shocking, I know, but it's what
Crazy talk.
happens. Right, right. So how does that how has that evolved or matured in your perspective from when you started in this space to sort of where you are now?
So we've had peaks and we've had valleys, and I have been extremely fortunate to work for a couple of truly great companies that actually care about culture. They're not just words on a wall. So I've seen it done really well. I've seen people and organizations pretend to do it and they don't execute on it well. I think it really depends on the leadership of the company. I think my big focus when I get into an organization, usually as a fractional, is to really understand what the pain points are, and then marry those up from the executive side to the, individual contributor side. How can we make this a little bit better? How can we bring innovation and creativity into your work? And I think that the other piece too that's missing today, and I actually had this interaction this morning on LinkedIn, was, I think we used to be really good at building community and building bonds and connections between people. And that's just not happening today. Today, we're like feeding them a bunch of information and hoping they're going to do well. But we're making these environments super transactional, and they don't need to be. People stay longer, they're happier. There's a bunch of benefits to creating community inside an organization. And I think some organizations are picking up on that now and trying to figure out how to rebuild that in their company.
And it's not about the ping pong table and the candy bar, right? It's
Absolutely not.
it's about tangible, actual results where they're contributing and they're able to see what those contributions provide in, I mean, in revenue, in profit. Like, we don't have to hide the fact that the company is in business to earn money behind some veil and, identify, well, you don't need to know what the company earns. You just need to know that you need to do your job. It's, well, if I know how I contribute to that earning, and I understand what levers I have the leverage to pull, then I can be more responsive in my role and my job. So
Mm-hmm.
let's gain clarity around that, and let's build that out so that I have an understanding of what my next steps are and where it's going to take me. Because if I don't, I need to go somewhere that does.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, I think that there's value to people who are asking the super basic questions sometimes when you allow them space to ask silly questions, which do exist. But you said it perfectly. I think one of the things that a lot of organizations are missing in building community and building talent that wants to stay for a while is telling them how they make money. Everything's so secretive. And I remember watching a master class from, I think it was Roz Brewer, and she said, I didn't know how Walmart's made money. And so I found out if they're out of milk, eggs, and bread, you're not making a penny that day. And so since that point, we started bringing into onboarding, how do we make money? If we're a tech B2B SaaS company, how are we making money? Because people like
Mhm.
me in HR roles don't get that,
Isn't that a funny
unfortunately.
disconnection? Yeah,
Oh,
like,
and
you're
they're
responsible
always
for
the
the
ones doing
people.
the onboarding.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Responsible for the, and this was, oh, so many conversations come to light after that statement. Uh, I had a conversation with someone that was talking about bottom line figures and reports and how we're looking at transitioning into the future and all of this big ethos, stuff like not really tangible, actual valuable details for the people that are on the floor that actually make that happen. And there's such a disconnect
Mm-hmm.
between how they know what their purpose is and what they're doing and how they're doing in the moment, on the floor, interacting with the people that are actually spending money with the company, and where that all goes and how that all works. And HR in particular should have a very clear understanding of what those team members are doing, what they're responsible for, and how that plays into the benefit of the company. Not just as a number, but actual, tangible, if this person is successful, this is what it correlates to for the corporation. And be able to have those fibers to pull apart and understand, right? So that there's clarity around that, and not to have this blanketed and assume that, oh well, they're going to exploit the system because they know too much about the business. It's, you got to trust. It all starts with trust. We were talking about community building
Yeah.
and the importance of not framing it as a do this, do that sort of position of, and the terrifying term of boot camp for various reasons, one to another. What does the ideal uh, onboarding framework look like, high level, to you, um, in as much as, if you had to sort of frame it, what that could should look like.
Yeah, it's about people connecting as human being individuals, right? We all want to bring ourselves to work, and if you are, Beth Boyd, Director of Learning and Development, I can't help a software engineer with that title, right? But Beth Boyd, the person who cares, can. So it's really about humanizing one another, figuring out that we all have this mission to the overall company vision that we're participating in. And I think it's also for me about, letting people know that so in onboarding, we do things like trust building and how to give feedback. We end every onboarding program with positive gossip. So you thank somebody who has helped you. I mean, even something as basic as showing you where the cafe is to get coffee in the morning. Just something that you remember that person for, that you're recognizing, because it's so important that there are these moments of connection. And ultimately, if you're marketing, you're not just marketing, you have questions that you need answered. So you need to connect with the other people in this group to help you answer those questions. And I think one of the most valuable experiences I had onboarding was at Disney. We had the 6-week leaders pathway uh, program before we even got into our areas of, what we were responsible for. And we worked with people in attractions, we worked with people in parking, we worked with people in janitorial. And we had this like bond. The onboarding groups were super connected. And that's what I try to do with every onboarding group that I have, because otherwise it's just transactional and it's boring and it's easy to leave because you're just going to go on to another one, right? It's same stuff, different location. So just really building that sense of camaraderie and community and building the trust that comes along with that when it's done well.
And I think, something that you said that really resonates with me is, if you don't feel like you belong, you're just going to move on. How important is that? And I mean, like, duh, but how important is that in the retention of quality talent today?
I think it's huge. I think you said it earlier, people want to do work that matters. And it matters when you feel like your efforts don't go unnoticed. And it matters when you feel like you're growing and developing. So when you create those moments where you're not just getting feedback once a year, you're getting it consistently and it's coming from a really good place, the good and the bad. You feel like there's some skin in the game and I can learn something here and I can grow here and I matter here. And I think that that is an element that's missing in so many organizations today, is that, people want to feel seen, heard, and valued. Maybe they feel seen sometimes, maybe they feel heard occasionally with their boss, but it's not consistent and there's no amplification of that anywhere. It's like in your little area. And I think people want to feel like their work makes a difference and have that means something in growth and development, in more opportunities, in, somebody saying, wow, that was incredible what you asked. I never even thought of that. Something as little as that can make a massive difference with how people feel like they want to continue with the company.
I think, you know, one of the big differences when you experience a culture, and I was talking with a prospective client earlier this week, and he said, I may not have the classical definition of culture that you'll appreciate. And I said, lay it on me. He said, culture is not something that you create within the company through anything more than execution and action. I said, I completely agree with that, because it's those culture is the result of something. It isn't, it's not something that is you point to it and it's there. It's through your actions. It's, you know everything that you do has a result from the way that you talk to someone, hey, that was a really great idea. The curiosity that you offer to someone, what's your perspective on this? How do you think this could or should play out? The way that you see your leaders interact with their peers and the people that report to them and the custodial staff and how they respect everyone across even keel. And when you come from a space where that isn't the norm and you go to a space where that is, it just feels different.
Yeah, right. Kindness matters, right?
And I think that kindness doesn't need to be nice. It doesn't need to be, afraid of giving someone criticism because you're going to get sued or get some sort of, legal labor case against you. That's not the way that it is. When they trust that your statements or your criticisms are coming from a place of growth and learning, they're much more likely to take that information in and build upon that. Have
Right.
you seen that in action, in process, experience that?
I have. It's inconsistent. I think one of the first workshops, and more about programming, right? But there's some workshops that are just valuable for
Yeah.
managers, for individual contributors, for whomever, for executives. Feedback is one of them.
Mhm.
And it is really about just teaching people an actionable and brain friendly way to give feedback. And the fact that it has to be fair and balanced. And, I even do this today, and I've been leading people for a very long time. Am I just complaining to them? Is my internal question. Or is it going to help them? And if it's just, I just want to get it off my chest and complain, I don't say it because that's my problem. It's a problem for me to fix. I want to get everybody to a place where they're asking themselves that question. And, is it true? Is it good? Is it useful? Right?
Mm,
Those three questions are your filter. And good or bad, if you can say yes to all of those, you've built community and you're starting to build community. And even though it might be hard for some people to hear some stuff that you're going to say, if it's good and it's true and it's useful, it's valuable. And I
mhm.
think people will recognize that even for the yucky stuff that they have to hear sometimes.
I love that. What a great self-reflective framework. And one of my best clients said, Chandler, how do you get clients? Because you basically have to go to them and say, hey, you're a bad communicator. You need my help. And it's, is it, when I use your framework, is it useful? Is it something that can help them? And is it said from a place of building them up, not tearing them down? It doesn't make it as hard to hear, but you do have to share it with a kindness and a humility around it, and not from a position of authority or you know trying to make them feel bad and yourself feel better, right? Which is kind of a position that a lot of leaders get muddled in a little bit, I find. Do you agree, or do
I
you have a different
totally agree.
perspective?
I think people, especially new leaders that haven't had a lot of time invested in developing those people leader skills,
Mm,
and they think that that's leadership is like, oh, I can't believe you made that decision. What a bonehead. Instead of like, oh gosh, okay, so let's discuss why you did that and maybe, learn this lesson and how we can do it better moving forward. I think that they think that having those moments of authority makes them a leader. And it used to back in the 70s and the 80s,
right.
probably. It doesn't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Again, we're so connected and we are so everybody has a voice now. Even entry level people have a voice, interns have a voice. That I think the investment of teaching people how to do a couple of things well. I remember one company in particular, I was doing these workshops for them and we called it Feedback Fridays, right? We had feedback sessions every Friday. And I'd ask people, like, when's the last time you got really good feedback? And they were like, oh, it wasn't long ago, 8 or 9 months, which totally coordinated with performance management, right? It coordinated with March or February. And I'd be like, oh, God, okay. When's the last time you gave really good feedback? And it would just be crickets.
Right.
It's just not the world people operate in because they never see it done well,
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah.
I
It's just
see
not modeled.
executives at organizations and they're just brutal sometimes. And that's a feather in their cap for the day, making somebody feel small. And that's just not the way. I mean, people are going to leave, right? You're not going to have retention. You're not going to have loyalty. You're not going to have people take 70% of their knowledge with them when they go. You're never going to get a leg up. It's not scalable to treat people poorly.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw the meme, and I'm sure we've all seen it, people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad managers. The study that came out that suggested that a bad manager has more impact on your health than your diet. Like there's such massive studies. The science is just coming out and screaming in our face that kindness matters. And building people up, that the sign of a great leader is not how many people you have under you, but how many people you elevate with you. And like we can go on
Right.
and on that side of things, but how do you transform a talent pipeline into the scalability of a business? What does that look like for you?
So it really depends on where the company is. If it's a smaller company and I'm going in as a fractional, it's because they want to create that learning culture. And in that case, right, it's so much easier. I mean,
Hmm.
every day is rainbows and sunshine and all of that good stuff. If it's a sort of my nightmare is a company that's been around for 12 or 15 years that still calls themselves a startup. You buyers, you're fooling yourselves.
Hmm.
And in that case, it's a ton of work. It really is about, okay, so we've got, managers who have been promoted over time who never were taught skills on how to lead others well. So we'll get to them, right? But let's capture the emerging leader group next and help them be really good. Because that sort of stuff is contagious because then people on Joe's team want to work and their productivity goes way up, whereas people on Adrian's team are miserable and quitting at a rapid pace. And people see that and they feel it. And in the lunchroom or on Zoom calls, they're talking about it. So it's really easy when a company wants to build that culture and have all of those things organized in really accessible ways. And then it's harder, but not doable in companies that are still calling themselves a startup after a decade.
Right.
It's harder, but you can do it. They just have to be open to it. And it really does. If the leaders believe in it, it will happen. If they don't, it's a struggle.
How do you I've always been a firm believer in microcultures. So regardless of the leadership of a company, you'll always find these pockets where you have these genuinely great leaders that inspire their team. It's like a great teacher at a school,
Mhm.
right? That's able to create this microculture. How do you encourage them and inspire them to lead regardless of the authority that they have over everyone above them? Is that something you've witnessed, seen, or worked with?
Yeah, we talk about leadership legacy a lot. And how do you want your people to feel after working with you for a month? And that's one of the first questions we ask when we start working with a cohort is how do you want your people to feel? You're leading this team or you're going to be leading a team. How do you want them to feel? And at the end of the day, they may not say it this way, but people want their people to be successful. They want to develop next gen leaders. They want to have people feel seen, heard, and valued. And I always say this, I don't care where people learn to be great leaders, or where they go, right? If they started here at company X and they go to company Y, they're going to remember that we helped them do it,
Hmm.
right? And so that's my legacy is I just want people to be great leaders for others, regardless of where they land. And that's what I want for managers. So we always start about talking about leadership legacy. What was your best leader? What was your worst leader? What did you learn
Mm.
from your worst leader? Like I always use my worst leader, and he's my favorite. I love him. His name was Pat. But I learned everything not to do from him when I was like 20. Everything. And I still know Pat today. Um, and I still talk to Pat today, and he knows that I use him as my example all the time. Um, because at the end of the day, he wasn't a great people leader, but we had trust and we could have a conversation. That was one thing he did really well. Everything else was horrible. But, but you know, we talk about legacy a lot. And that's where we start with our emerging leader program is like, what's your legacy? What did you learn that's great and not so great? What do you want to carry forward? How do you want to make people feel?
I try to stay out of the political arena, particularly in today's climate. What's the most exciting for you about leadership going into tomorrow, and that you're most excited about introducing your clients or the people that bring you on board to work with their teams? What's inspiring for you?
There's a lot. I think it is giving people the toolkits to be successful no matter where they go. That is most important for me. I would love it if they would stay, but at the end of the day, I can't control that for people. Because it is in our sessions, in our cohorts, we can create this really good, close microculture. But what happens outside of my little orbit, I don't have a lot of control over, but I do want people to remember where they learned it. And I'm excited that people are hungry for information. I'd certainly have people that are nominated to go through cohorts that don't want to be there. And I don't put pressure on that. But I do wait for the almost inevitable message going, okay, that active listening thing, the support and shift response, you're totally right. I was doing the shift response too much. So if it's just that one little thing, I love that. And I get excited that people ultimately learn something. And I think people are hungry for it. So that gets me up and keeps me going every day. I also think that building community and being playful at work and finding joy and inspiring awe, which not a lot of people talk about, is really important for all of the work that we're doing. Because to your point, there isn't enough of that. There's doom and gloom everywhere. If we can create those moments of happiness and joy and awe in a really good way for people, even for 5 minutes, that lights me up. I
Yeah.
love that stuff. And I'm very fortunate that with what I do, I get to have those moments with people in onboarding, in learning, in talent management, in engagement. I find those little moments to try to bring joy to people. And that keeps me going every single day. And nothing will ever get in the way of that.
You know, and it's not that false toxic positivity, right? It's genuine excitement. And I tried to schedule a podcast with someone that I work with and that's become a friend, and she said, I keep putting off scheduling the podcast with you. It's always the fun stuff that I put to the bottom of my to-do list. And I said, listen, you got to lift that up. Like, if there's one thing that we should be carrying forward from our childhood, it's the willingness, ability, and intentionality around play. Because, like, just because we're getting older does not mean we should stop having fun. The best moments of your life are going to be those moments with your kids, those moments with your nieces, nephews, younger generation, and experiencing them things that made you feel joyful as a child. And to do that with a coworker, to do that in a workspace, to have those aha moments where you're creating that connective tissue that people remember you for. You know, well, Pat may have not been the best leader in many other areas. You're able to connect and laugh and remember those connective moments that you had with him,
Yeah.
and be able to carry that forward. And I think being intentional around creating those moments doesn't mean that you need to go to an offsite for a week with just your leadership team. How are you doing that daily, and be intentional about what that looks like?
Yeah.
That is culture and community.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if people saw that for the value it brings, 5 minutes, it's nothing. It's energizing.
Mhm.
there's a moment where you are right. You go home and you don't talk about all the misery you had. You talk about that one moment that you
Yes.
had 5 minutes that
Yeah.
was fantastic. And challenging yourself to find those moments too, and that's what we do a lot of work around that too, is like, okay, what's new and exciting? Don't ask me how you are. You're just going to say you're fine.
Yeah. Right.
Let's talk about something real. And so that's a big part of building community too, is helping people be real and not just empty platitudes that we're so used to being like, fine, good, thanks, you know,
And,
real talk.
no, but really, how are you? And,
Right.
like, and I completely understand the intentionality around getting the work done, and you don't want to be distracted, and we're not paying you to socialize on the clock. But the issue is that when people bring their full selves to work, their productivity is actually dramatically higher in a lot less time. So you're you're investing in that 5 minutes to get an exponential value out, and that doesn't need to always revert to dollars and cents, because that's not the point of that comment, but it is to suggest that there is value and a return on investment in that time. And I think that's important that a lot of people don't get right.
Right. And to your point, people can play what pool at the office, billiards at the office. They're not getting anything done, and it's to avoid work. But if you build those moments intentionally and they are for something, they serve a purpose, you can tell. You can walk through an office where it's either hybrid or in person, and you can see happy teams and you can see the miserable teams. Why wouldn't you want a whole office of happy teams and happy people? Not that it's going to happen 100% all the time, every day, but you can get pretty darn close with most of the team on a daily basis. And they care, and there's more accountability, there's more
Yes.
innovation, there's more creativity, and there's more revenue on teams that have those moments.
So what's the holdup? Why the lack of adoption? Why the attention to the penny pinching? The I mean, everyone lays it at the feet of the accountants, right? The bean counters. But how do we bridge that gap where we can say, I know that that's really important to you, but if you just look over here, here's where that really matters. And that accountability and the cost of retention is really, really high.
Well, I
When
totally, and I can give you a great example, and I
perfect.
can tell you it doesn't have to cost a lot to do those because those are human moments, right? It's not software, it's not an engagement survey. All of those things are expensive. Um, and I can give you real numbers. Like I saved a company $270,000 last year, $270,000, and our retention was up 26% because we created moments of human connection. Our year one retention was better because our onboarding program was no longer a boot camp. It was an actual interactive moment for people to connect all year, every single quarter. And then we had biweekly orientations, but then we brought everybody together. We just did it better. It wasn't piecemealed. It was very intentional. And it didn't always flesh out to be completely smooth, right? Um, Took a lot to get the executives on board with it. They were a little bit arbitrary about like, oh, you want us there? Oh, I might have something better to do. But really figuring out, okay, John Doe, CEO, might not show up for this. All right, what are we going to do to fill the time? And still using that time really wisely. And it doesn't have to cost a lot. It really is. It's human interaction. It doesn't have to cost you anything. It can actually save you money. It saved us money in not buying software that was unnecessary because we thought it would boost our engagement. It was about finding the right software. It was about creating moments where people wanted to be there. It was about giving people and managers, to your point earlier, building great microcultures. And it was just really about giving people that sense of, I need to be here because they're counting on me and I'm counting on me and I get a sense of accomplishment from what I'm doing. And it didn't, it we actually saved money in the process by making it more human than automated.
What allows leaders who need these types of services to recognize that they need these types of services and invite someone like you in to their space? Like
I,
what's the trigger?
well, again, it really depends. There's companies that know it's way easier to build that culture as you're baking this organization that is going to scale and grow, versus the people who are like, nah, we don't need it. No, we can wait another year. It'll be fine in 5 years if we bring this on. And it's just, it's it, it shows in the numbers. I mean, if I ask them like, what's your turnover, how many people self-demoted from being a people leader, and they're like, I have no idea. And I'll say, okay, who can get us that information? Well, let me send an email. 15 minutes you have that 83% of their people managers that were promoted self-demoted, and they had to bring in external talent. I mean, that's a question I ask. How many people self-demoted or left after being promoted? So sometimes it takes something like that. Like I can say the whole time, I talked to a couple people, they didn't seem happy, but the numbers don't lie for people. And
Right.
I'm not hugely, I always say I'm data informed, not data driven, because right, our job is like people.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't, data doesn't help me that much. But there are some questions that you can ask where they can't argue. And
Right.
when you see like self demotions like that or regrettable turnover, it's very clear for people. So in those established decade old startups,
Yes.
that's my question.
Yeah. And I think I guess that's sort of what I'm looking to glean, right? Is, anyone in our audience that's that middle management or sub C-suite or C-suite that has a leader that maybe doesn't believe in what we're talking about here, but they do. And they see it day in and day out, and they know that they need someone like you to come in and, you know, shed light on what is dark, right? How do they do that? And I mean, I think that, you know, um, that metric is really powerful where you're seeing self-demotion or you're seeing turnover after promotion. Those are two numbers that are hard to refute, right? Is there anything else, any advice that you would give to that person to sort of carry up the hill or share internally to sort of create a discourse around bringing this to
Around
the,
building
yeah,
a
yeah.
culture that's good. Yeah, I mean, I think that I think almost everybody, my story is not unique. I've worked for great companies and I've worked for pretty awful companies. I think understanding what right looks like for you
Mhm.
is a great place to start. I also think that we're living in this moment where there's a bunch of communities. There's communities on LinkedIn, there's
Mm.
communities on Slack, there's communities on other places like school where you can find your people to help you figure out how to communicate your needs to people. I also think that there is a ton of open source information out there.
Mm.
I mean, there's courses that you can take from Yale about how to be a better leader that are literally free, or learn AI or any of that stuff. So I think, really it's about staying curious. It's about leaning into your network. It's about knowing that there's a better way and not getting exhausted by all the naysayers.
Mm.
Because at a point, I think so many people are like, we'll get there, we'll get there, we'll get there. And so finally you just give it up. Don't give it up, would be my big piece of
Yeah,
advice.
yeah.
Just keep going. You know what's right and you know what's wrong. And when you know what you want to do for your team and your legacy, I mean, there's no stopping you. There's just this wealth of information out there.
I-
So just keep going.
Yeah, and I think you know you've got to look at and reflect on the moments that matter, and do you want to build that culture there or find it? And sometimes the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. So trying to improve your space and build that out and be that leader regardless of authority is something that you need to do. So
Yeah.
all great points. If you were to describe yourself in 3 words, what where would you take that?
Oy. I would say I'm curious. I'm naturally curious. I'm really creative and I'm pretty tenacious, which sometimes isn't the best combo, but
Oh, preaching to the choir. Yeah, one of my best and worst qualities. You know, it's great that you don't know when to let go, but you need to let go now.
well, and I will give Pat his props. He always said to me, he's like, "Is this really a hill you want to die on?" So I ask myself that question sometimes too, right? There's some things I just know I'm not going to win. There's some things I know I'm not going to win today.
Right.
And there's some things I know I'm willing to go the distance for. And it's about being able to identify those and being tenacious with the stuff that I know I'm willing to go the distance for to make the workplace just 10% better.
Yeah. And then 10% better, and then
Yeah.
10% better. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So, not sure if you're a quote person. You know, a quote that has always resonated with me was something from Abe Lincoln, where he said, you know, give me 6 hours to cut down a tree, and I will spend four sharpening my axe, and it's just sort of a testament to being prepared. Do you have one that you look to, or that guides you, or do you have words that you follow?
I do. I've got a quote and I've got a mantra. So
Perfect. Let's hear them
I'll
both.
pick my mantra because I think that it has propelled me forward. I used to be the type of person who was like, I'll wait till the end. I work better under pressure and all that stuff. And you can hope it all works out, but my mantra is hope is not a strategy. You can hope that sometimes your people will be great leaders even without the training,
Hmm.
but hope's not a strategy. Most don't know where to start. So you need to build that out and you need to give them support and you need to invest in them and you need to help them invest in them. So hope is not a strategy is sort of my go-to mantra, and
Hmm.
I probably use it 15 times a day because people are like, I hope it works out. And I'm like,
Uh,
okay. Even with my kids, I'm like, we don't say the age word here. Like, what are we going to do to make sure it happens?
I'm
Um,
with you a hundred
yeah.
percent on that. You know, I got Yoda over my left shoulder here, and you
Yeah.
know, try or not try. You know,
Yes.
do or not do. Right? It's we cannot um we we cannot try for a result. Right? You're either gonna do it, or you're not.
And it's part of that legacy, right? It's part of
Yes.
that legacy that we talk about. I probably have, not in a lot, but in some like workshop decks that I have, like there's just one slide that says hope is not a strategy. Because that's what I want people to remember. I want them to, next time they say, well, I hope it works out okay, whether that's a strategic move or a people move or whatever it is, I just want them to be like, okay, maybe I should invest 10 minutes in figuring this out.
Right.
Everything is figure outable if you put some time and energy into
Yep.
it.
Yep. Nope. Nope. Good one for sure. Morning routine, you know, for most of the teens, it was meditation, or it was, um I think cold plunging is the current meditation. Do you have a morning routine that you dive into that supports you, or is it more of an evening routine?
I'm definitely a morning person. I work with global teams, so I have to say during the week, my morning routine is usually getting up at 3, getting ready for a 4 o'clock workshop for
Ooh,
Israel or Germany or
yes,
France or somewhere
yes.
lovely. Um, so that really has been my morning routine for the last 10 years. I'm a mom of two, so after that call is over, it's about waking the boys up to
Gotcha.
get them ready for school. So my morning routine is workshop and mayhem. And it works.
Yeah, I one of my best clients is out of Italy currently, so I'm very familiar with the early mornings, and
Yeah.
three daughters of my own. Also very familiar with the mayhem. Um, what what would be the one thing that you're most afraid of, and why? You can be as vulnerable as you wish, either personal or professional, but what does that look like for you?
Um, I think I'm always checking myself to make sure I don't fall into complacency,
Hmm,
right? Because I can't do what I do and inspire people to learn more and do more and be better and shoot for more if I'm complacent with where I'm at. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. Um, I felt myself kind of falling into a little bit of complacency last year. And so I said, this is crazy talk. I'm driving my children to sports. They have like, tennis lessons and lacrosse and all of this stuff. And I'm so excited to sit there and just look at my computer for an hour. Like that's not okay. So I actually signed my sister and I up because we live really close to each other for Irish step dancing lessons because
Nice.
we're going to go see Riverdance. And even something as small as that, and having to get on the train and go into the city on, Monday nights to do Irish step dancing, which is wildly difficult, um, is inspiring. And from that came, the art of sushi making classes and knitting classes and golf classes and all of that stuff. Where I was like, why am I pushing my children? And I'm perfectly fine to, like, literally sit Indian style on the couch and do nothing for an hour. Like it's
Mm.
such a waste of time. So I think it makes me nervous to feel like I'm being complacent, because how am I going to be inspiring to anybody else if they're like, what do you do for fun? I'm like, nothing. What?
I, I sit on my couch with my
I do
phone and
nothing.
I scroll. Yeah. Yeah. No,
So I always keep myself in check for that, because I don't want that to be a model for, and you said it earlier in our conversation before this was, do as I say, not as I do. And I don't want that for my kiddos. And I don't want that for people that I'm lucky enough to support at work.
mm, love that. Favorite superhero? Are you a superhero person? Is there someone that you deeply admire that you aspire to emulate and model? What does that look like for
Is it
you?
okay to go off the superhero chart?
Totally. This is not this can be a Marvel DC free zone for sure.
Okay, I love history
Excellent.
and I love people that caused problems in history.
A good troublemaker.
Where it always didn't flesh out to be perfect. It wasn't
Hmm.
a happy ending for them. So someone like Napoleon Bonaparte, and I, I love his story. He's
Hmm.
so interesting. He was this brilliant military mind. He designed the city of Paris. I mean, come on, like you're an
Right.
architect, you're a military dude, like what are you? You're everything, and that's okay to be everything. So I like people like that. I love stories from like prohibition in the 20s and 30s, because people figured stuff out, and they were, not necessarily the gangsters. They have their own stories, but just people figured stuff out. And I love that sort of fortitude and tenacity. And, even in the eye of everything breaking down, you can be really successful and have a really interesting story to tell. So I like characters like that. And, I was fortunate that I grew up with a father who was really interesting like that. He was a labor attorney, but he hated that. So he became an inventor, and then he was this, and then he was that. And all of this stuff made this really interesting casserole of stories and experiences and stuff like that. So I just love that sort of like squiggly path of life. I just love people who have a great story, and I want to be able to have a great story one day.
I think what I most appreciate about that response is that the willingness to accept flawed character traits, right? Because I mean, it would be really easy to say, "Oh my God, Napoleon Bonaparte, like, wasn't he exiled for very good reason?" And
Where
it, um, but the ability to sort of say yes and you know pull the good stuff out and say, but also did this, kind of cool, and prohibition area, the Al Capones, and that's what you sort of go to, right? Is that gangster mentality, but you know the ability to figure it out and during a really hard time is
Well, even just
commendable.
regular people who just figured out, like,
Yeah,
I love the stories of, like there were a lot of Rabbi O'Malley's back in that day.
right,
They knew they could get their hands on alcohol if they became rabbis because it was sanctioned for
right,
church stuff.
yeah.
It just even figuring it out that way, and just being resourceful and interesting. And I do like flawed characters because I certainly am. And I think everybody can sort of create this really interesting world for themselves. I would hate to model for my kids, like getting up, sort of that office space
Mm,
mentality where you get
yes.
up and you just clock in and you do your stuff and you keep your head down and you go home. And, what fun is that? That's no fun at all.
Have you seen my stapler? Yeah, no, exactly. Exactly. And I
Stapler.
think I think it's and I really hope that this comes back, but you know, the people refer to it as a gap and the distance between, the divisive culture and the divisiveness of society. I really hope that we can get back to a time where it's okay to disagree and not feel critical or vitriol against the individual that you disagree with, and just have the ability to respect the individual for their propensity to a differing opinion and an alternative perspective, right? And still be able to grab a pint and ask how their day was and hope that their children are okay.
Right.
Because at the end of it all, I think we all want the same future. We approach it differently, and I think that's okay.
Right. Right. And we weigh things differently. And right, that's what makes humans interesting. And that's what makes being curious about other people interesting, right? I don't want to be around people who are all like me. It would drive me bananas. I want to
I
be
couldn't
around people I
imagine.
can learn something from and be
Yeah.
challenged by and have sometimes what is a more heated conversation. Because that's what's interesting about life.
Mhm.
Like, being around people that agree with everything you say is super boring. Um, but being open to those conversations and not like, oh, I can't talk to them anymore. They don't agree with me.
Right.
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 There's no need for that.
Yeah.
You learn more from the people who challenge you than you do from people who agree with you.
That you disagree with. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Listen, this has been an absolutely astounding conversation. I really appreciate your patience through all of the
great.
tech difficulties, and I'm glad we got to the other side of it.
We did.
Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you think just the community needs to hear or know or learn?
So it goes along really well with what we were just talking about, and that's that it's okay to talk to strangers and learn from them and ask them goofy questions
Hmm.
sometimes. Um, you know, Even people who aren't good leaders have something to teach us. So taking that in those moments where you're frustrated or annoyed or whatever, I think that that's a really good lesson for people to have. And you're totally right, right? We're so consumed with like, oop, is this similarity bias or am I doing this? And, forget all that stuff and just deal with the human in front of you in a very open, interested, curious way. We don't ask one another great questions anymore. And it's just about asking the questions that you're curious about. And I don't know that I could have, but no one's ever said anything, offended anyone with a question that I had. Um, but most people, when you approach it from a very human place, they're willing to help and answer and give you information. And I think that that's something that I hope for everyone.
Perfect. Love that.
Yeah.
I think I think it'll be exciting if more people are curious and you know pull in the opportunity or take this moment in time to pull in curiosity around what they can do better and how they can better shape the spaces that people work. And I think you're doing a tremendous job of inspiring that space, and I commend you on that. So thank you again for your time and your
Oh,
patience, and I can't wait for the next time.
me too. I'm very excited. This was fantastic. It made my day. So thank you.
Thank you.